English translation. 208th contact. Tuesday, 8th April 1986, 05:27 hours.
On the great journey, I spoke with Ptah about the fact that the earthly scientists still have not figured out what actually causes fear in the human beings, respectively where the actual origin is to be sought for this. Unfortunately, this conversation was not kept and thus was not recorded. Can you, perhaps, mention again the three most important factors through which fear can arise in its origin?
On the one hand, fear can be genetically conditioned, but on the other hand, it can also be caused by a wrong upbringing, as well as by ignorance and misconceptions.
So also by imagination and fantasy?
That is of correctness.
As Ptah explained to me, fear. If it is not corrected, and if it arises in the form of ignorance, misconceptions, imagination, and fantasy may have effects on the genes and, consequently, program these over time, by what means fear then appears via the genes and becomes inheritable, as this is also the case with many other things, from which some degenerations and also evolutionary values can emerge. A fact, as Ptah explained, that is still unknown to the earthly scientists, however, and that will only be recognized in the future, which should not be too far off anymore.
That is also of correctness.
Then a question concerning aggression. Ptah told me that the so-called neurotransmitter, serotonin, restrains aggression. The greater the amount of serotonin is in the brain of the person, the less aggressive the person would be. Have I understood this correctly?
What you said is correct.
Nice. Recently, you said that scientists were working at full speed all around the Earth on decoding the DNA of different animals and humans.
I spoke of that, yes. Experiments and research of this kind have already run in various laboratories of many earthly countries for many years, whereby also some successes were achieved. However, the coming time will very quickly bring more successes in this connection, whereby it will probably be around the turn of the millennium that the entire Earth human DNA will be decoded. But already years prior to this, the relevant progress and successes will lead to this and be constantly developed and refined, such that through this, the awareness of crimes will increase in a rising measure.
DNA, genetic engineering, and everything connected therewith will inevitably lead in the coming time to enormous changes and progress in a variety of scientific and technological fields. Medical science will benefit from this tremendously, as well as the biological and technical sciences. So you said?
You remember correctly. The aforesaid is of correctness.
For my part, Svath taught me that there are various forms of human intelligence, and thus, not just one type. Thus, he explained that there is an emotional intelligence, a thought-feeling intelligence, and a creative intelligence, along with a musical intelligence, an intellectual intelligence, an individual intelligence, and a general intelligence. Further, he also mentioned idea intelligence, fantasy intelligence, and character intelligence, as well as consciousness intelligence, but these are not all of the manifestations. All forms of intelligence taken together, namely in their full value, result in the actual intelligence quotient. The higher the quotient is, the more intense, and the higher the speed of thought is, with the maximum speed of thought being the speed of light. And the higher the person's speed of thought and combination is, the higher his or her intelligence should be. This all seems clear and also logical to me, in complete contrast to the so-called IQ tests, which are made by pompous earthly psychologists, etc. As to the question, what is to be made of these tests?
The use of these intelligence quotient tests among the earthly psychology practitioners is well known to me. Unfortunately, I must describe these tests as extremely deficient and as just as wrong as the psychology that is applied by the psychologists, which for the most part does not truthfully correspond to such but rather only to illusions and false diagnoses, by which entirely wrong analyses and attestations are very often made.
Which very often leads to the fact that, for example, rapists and murderers, etc., are released from penal institutions or insane asylums as being cured and are released upon humanity again, after which they then commit similar new and often even worse crimes.
Unfortunately, that is a word of truth, which also proves the actual inability of those who presumptuously call themselves psychologists and who are of the crazy belief that they, with their underdeveloped knowledge of psychology, would stand above others and would be able to judge these psychologically.
A harsh word.
But it corresponds to the truth.
I think that you, as a doctor and scholar of psychology, are able to judge very well.
That is correct.
Of course, your explanations are consistent with those of Svath and Ptah, who also spoke as well as you. Svath was, among other things, a physician and thus an excellent doctor and scholar of psychology, as well as Ptah, his son, that is. Through Svath's outstanding medical knowledge, I was preserved from death by him at the age of 6 months. Also, his knowledge of psychology was always extremely valuable and useful for me.
That is known to me.
Do you still have time to answer one more question for me, if you can answer it at all?
A few minutes still remain for me, before I have to resume my duties which are laid upon me.
Jacobus asked me about original Switzerland, respectively about when humans operated agriculturally in Switzerland for the first time. He was actively trained in agriculture and is just interested in it. He supposes that the lake dwellers already worked in agriculture or horticulture in some form. Do you have any knowledge of this? Ta told me that you occupy yourself with the original history of Switzerland and Europe.
Ta's statement corresponds to the truth. Jacobus' supposition is false. However, because these were not lake dwellers who first engaged in agriculture and horticulture in Switzerland and in other parts of Europe, but these were northern and northeastern immigrants, who appeared about 11,000 years ago and who cultivated the country over several millenniums, lived in so-called long houses, together with cattle and dogs, etc., but who still engaged in hunting. But now, my friend, it is that time for me. Goodbye.
Take care.